You guys want to hear something terrifying? The Prophecy of the Popes.
Oh boy.
This book in the Vatican archives predicted every single pope from 1143 all the way to our current pope. But the scary thing is, after Pope Francis, the last one, it just says Judgment Day.
And according to St. Malachy's prediction, this end time, following the reign of the 112th Pope, is right around the corner.
And the story goes that he fell into a trance. All that night, he would mention these Latin phrases.
Each one of these Latin phrases would match up to the reign of a particular pope. And in that vision, he saw 112 popes up until the tribulation time, till the end.
Pope Francis has died.
What just happened is ramifications for the future, even for the end times.
So what do you think? Is this the last pope?
No, because they're already starting to vote in the next one. They're working on it right now, so.
But what if something goes wrong?
They have plenty of people to choose from.
They have plenty of people to choose from. So you don't think that Francis was the last pope? I mean, there's a lot of, I guess, hype and news and things concerning this, right? I don't know if you've seen any of that right now, but there's a lot of like, oh, he was supposed to be the last one.
Yeah, I think it was like he was the last one, and after that, the end of the world was going to come, or something like that.
Very interesting.
Yeah,
very interesting. I came across. We'll get into the original like idea of what spawned this, but one of the people that had something to say about this, I thought it was strange, was Nostradamus. People are picking up on Nostradamus. Not that he's the most credible person that's out there. But some believe that Nostradamus predicted the death of the Pope in 2025. And of course, his stuff is always very vague. Mm-hmm. So here's what he wrote. He said, through the death of a very old pontiff, a Roman of good age will be elected. Of him it will be said that he weakens his seat, but long will he sit and in mordant activity.
Okay, that's definitely vague. Like,
it's super vague.
And they say this relates to 2025. I understand why they think that, because Pope Francis was elected in an old age.
You don't think he was in an old age?
No, he was.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah.
He was actually one of the older popes, at least is trackable, as we know. So he dies at 88 years old. Mm-hmm. Pope Leo the 13th died at 93. Mm-hmm. And that made him the oldest pope in modern history. Benedict the 16th, he stepped down at 85. Mm-hmm. So had he kept going, maybe, I mean, I don't know when Benedict died. I don't know how old he was.
Like 2-3 years ago or so.
Yeah. So he might have been the oldest pope in modern history, maybe, if he'd have kept going. Pope John Paul II, the very well-known pope. He was elected at 58 and died at 85.
Wow. He was on for a while.
He was in for a while. And then you have like Clement, who was elected at 51, and Benedict the Ninth. He was the youngest, elected at about 20. Mm-hmm. So when they're talking about age of popes, it seems like Francis is older, as far as most of them go. But this is so vague. Like, I think you could pin this on, a number of...
Right.
Of popes. Although he's saying, at least the news source I was looking at was saying this was for 2025. So coincidence? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Probably. He also hinted at details of the successor to Francis, writing, a young man of dark skin with the help of the great king will deliver the purse to another of red color.
What? Why the red color? I have
no idea what that
means. Dark skin, maybe African, because I know there are a lot of cardinals that have been voted in by Francis who are from Africa. So they're looking at likely the next pope being from Africa, Asia, or Latin America. But the red color, the only way we refer to people having red skin, which is almost a derogatory way of talking about it, is Native Americans. So...
Yeah, so I don't know. I don't know if it means red color like cardinal. It's so vague. It could mean a lot of things, and people have a tendency to make stuff try to fit based on what they think it might be. But this is contradictory to another prophecy that has been circling lately. And that is the one from St. Malachy. This is gaining a lot of traction in the news right now. And he supposedly predicted all the popes until the last from the time of 1143 until now.
So he said
or until the end.
So there's like a certain number of popes that were going to come in, and Francis was the last number of them.
See, now it depends on how you interpret the document.
Okay.
Right? This is where it gets a little bit tricky. But this guy, by all intents and purposes, he lived from 1094 to 1148. He was the legate of Ireland. So that means he was appointed by the Pope to be more or less to Ireland. The buck stops here. Mm-hmm. And he was also credited with what's called the prophecy of the popes, which is what we were just referring to. So this is what all the hype about. And there's two ways of looking at this. One version is that Francis was the last one. Mm-hmm. Well, where does that leave us if they're in the middle of electing another one, right? Then it would make this thing not valid at all, right?
Yeah.
Another version says that between the last two popes, there is room for extra popes.
Okay. That's a different interpretation.
Until the last one takes the throne, so to speak, and he also takes the name Peter the Roman.
Yeah, because Peter was the first pope.
Yeah, so it's kind of like bookending all that. So from 1143 until, well, it depends, but some people are saying 2027 is when it ends.
Why 2027?
They look at the sum total of the prophecy and they find the midway mark and they calculate the remainder of the years based on midway so from the first to the midway, and they calculate the rest of the years from midway to the end, and they end it in 2027, which is fascinating if you were to couple that with all kinds of other belief systems that are out there also projecting things to happen in 2027 as well.
Well, there was also a lot of talk about 2025, which we're in right now.
There's a lot of talk about a lot of dates. So there's talk about 2030, and it seems like everybody's got a date for
the Mayans. Something. The Mayans had that too, and nothing happened.
2012.
Yep.
So fascinating that, on the one hand, Nostradamus is like, look, this there's going to be a pope that's dead in 2025. And then this prophecy of the popes by St. Malachy is supposed to say, well, in 2027, it's all done. Mm-hmm. These are, interesting prophecies. We can put that in quotations. Mm-hmm. Now, here's where it gets very fascinating. This prophecy of the popes that supposedly Malachy was credited with writing, the story goes that he took this document that he wrote, he took it to the Pope, and then the Pope looked at it and they had it put in the Vatican archives. Mm-hmm. And then it was found, or rediscovered in 1590. Mm-hmm. That's almost 450 years later. Mm-hmm. So what is that? What does that mean? Well, this guy that found it, Arnold Wyon, it's believed that he was actually working in concert with other individuals, because until the time that it was found, it seems like the prophecies that were written down were pretty accurate, like pretty descriptive. Like they did a good job describing who was Pope until that time. And what's believed is that in 1590, he found this and then started continuing, maybe not him, but somebody else started continuing the document. Mm-hmm. And he was working in concert with them. And they were trying to orchestrate who the next pope was supposed to be based on the prophecy, instead of the one who might be likely elected. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of like political jockeying that was done. So I'm going to get to what it says, and then we'll get beyond that. So here is what supposedly how this all goes down according to this document. In the final persecution of the Holy Roman Church, there will sit as bishop Peter the Roman, who will pasture his sheep in many tribulations. And when these things are finished, the city of seven hills, we know that to be Rome, will be destroyed. And the dreadful judge will judge his people.
The end.
The end.
Okay.
So, pretty vague, right? Mm-hmm. And some people are saying this refers to Francis. And some are saying, no, it's not Francis. Basically, they believed that the one before the last one lines up pretty well with Benedict by very vague descriptions, right? But then in between, it could be several people, it could be one, it could be two, it could be a whole bunch, and then there's a last one. And this is the description of the last one.
My question would be, the Bible is full of verses that show you how to test whether someone is a legitimate prophet. And we can put a link in the description for whoever wants to check it out. The Bible tells you, this is what you should look for.
Yes.
I would really want to put that test on these individuals.
You bet.
And then if it doesn't fit, it's not a true prophecy.
You know what's fascinating to me about this, though? There are a couple of pieces in here that, even though they're vague, they are almost nods to the book of Revelation. And you wonder if somebody was looking at Revelation and saying, let's see if we can, put down something that'll work here.
It's a bit of a distraction from what the Bible is saying.
And I'll show you a couple of verses. One of them is Revelation 17:9. Would you mind reading that?
Here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits.
So in biblical scholarship, this is commonly understood that the 7 heads or 7 mountains is the city of 7 hills, at least in Protestant circles.
Yeah.
That this is an identifying mark of that power, which is identified as Babylon in the book of Revelation, but which is really Rome. So it's essentially God's finger pointing at the Vatican.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we know that physically Vatican and Rome actually sits on 7 hills.
Yeah. So when that is in this prophecy of St. Malachy, it's like, okay, well, that's interesting. You're identifying Rome as part of this piece. But the Bible does that already. You don't have to go to St. Malachy or anybody else. The Bible's already giving us lots of detail. And here's another one in Revelation 18:9 and 10. Would you mind reading that?
The kings of the earth who committed fornication and lived luxuriously with her will weep and lament for her when they see the smoke of her burning, standing at a distance for fear of her torment, saying, Alas, alas, that great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour your judgment has come.
So here in the book of Revelation, we see that Babylon is going to be destroyed. Just like what it was alluding to in the prophecy of St. Malachy. And then it basically says, and then the end.
Yeah. But this Babylon is not the original, Babylon. This is a spiritual, symbolic.
We're talking about essentially papal Rome. So those two pieces, it seems to, you could say, be right on, but that information already existed from the time of John the Revelator. And many Bible scholars had picked up on that through the years, even from early times. So also the Catholic Church comments on this prophecy of St. Malachy. And it's very interesting when you look at what they say. They don't think it's legitimate. And the consensus among at least their scholars is that a 16th century forgery created for partisan political reasons. And the bottom line is they think it's a fraud.
There you go.
So it's, supposedly from their people, their organization, and they're like, no, we don't put any stock in this. We don't buy this.
Right.
This thing is not legitimate.
I mean, if they were, then they would not choose another pope, right? So.
Well, yeah, and that makes sense. And so it brings the question, though, does the Bible tell us about the last pope?
It doesn't. Not specifically.
Well, I think it does.
You think it does?
I think it does tell us about the last pope.
Okay.
But it's not going to spell it out in the same way as Nostradamus or St. Malachy. I believe it's identifying the last pope by description of what happens
In the world. Yes, I agree
by
with
what
you.
the power does,
Yes.
but not by saying it's this guy or this year.
Or this number of popes. Yeah.
But we know by the signs that the Bible talks about that it's identifying a power, and this is what that power will look like. And with that power comes the association of a man.
Yep.
And so where do we get that? Actually, we get it from Daniel chapter 7 and verse 8. And there are actually tons of clues here. So I'm going to read it and then we'll go through some of the points. It says, I was considering the horns, and there was another horn, a little one, coming up among them, before whom 3 of the first horns were plucked up by the roots, and there in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking pompous words. Now, we've talked about this before, but prior to verse 8 in Daniel chapter 7, what are we seeing?
We're seeing 4 different beasts, and Daniel says a beast represents a kingdom.
Okay. And what are those beasts?
Well, the first one is representative of Babylon.
Yep.
It's a lion. It
Yep.
has wings. The second one is representative of Medo-Persia. It's a bear,
It's a bear. Yeah.
leaning on its side, has ribs out of its mouth.
Yep.
And the third one is a leopard with many heads, and it's representative of Greece. And it also has wings.
Okay. And then there's this other power, this other beast that comes on the scene. And it's different from the others. It's
Yep.
not some commonly identifiable
Right.
creature.
But
you
it
could
has
say.
elements of all the other ones.
Yeah. And so then in this last beast, it's saying, this is the context. It says it has horns, and it's like, well, this last beast has all these horns, but then it comes to focus on one particular horn.
That plucks up 3 others.
Yeah. So one of the identifying marks of this last power, or you could say the one of the things that this last power will do, is it comes up from among the 10 horns. And these horns are essentially the kingdoms of Western Europe. So this last power we should expect to be found in the region of Western Europe. So does Rome fit that
100%.
description? Yes, it does. Okay. We also see it has eyes like the eyes of a man. Okay. Eyes in the Bible denote intelligence. And this is the eyes of the eyes of a man. And so a man at the head of this power, this organization, that can speak for it. You and I were just talking before this about some interesting detail about the papacy when it comes to the United Nations.
Yes.
What was that?
Well, let me read this to you. The Vatican, the Holy See, holds permanent observer status at the UN. It is not a full voting member, but it can participate in debates and UN meetings, submit documents, and influence resolutions. This unique status highlights the Vatican's role as both a religious and political entity on the world stage.
Yeah. Very interesting. So when we look at, if we're saying Rome fits this bill, the Vatican, the papacy fits this bill, does it have a man at the head of it that speaks for it?
Absolutely.
It does. Okay, so Western Europe, Rome fits the bill, man at the head fits the bill. Okay, we also see here another clue. It says, before whom the first horns were plucked out by the roots. Horn the 3. It's very specific, 3. So there were 3 kingdoms that in years past, the papacy had worked against to usurp them. And it says they were plucked out by the roots. These people were, you could say, exterminated. They were the Ostrogoths, the Vandals, and the Heruli. And this is a very common known historical tidbit you can look up and study and figure out. Yes, they worked to remove these. They were essentially in opposition on some things.
They didn't want to submit.
Politically, religiously, they didn't see eye to eye.
Yeah.
So it was not in the best interest of the Vatican for them to continue to be around because they were opposers. He shall be different from the first ones. This is a clue we find in Daniel 7:24. It would be different than the other 10 kingdoms. This is what it's talking about contextually. Different in what way? Well, the thing you read from the United Nations gives us a clue. It's not just a secular power.
It's a church-state power.
It's a church-state power. It's a religious power as well. And so the person that's at the head, doesn't just act as head of state, they act as head of a religion. And that's very unique. And there are probably not many kingdoms that are set up that way, where the person at the top is both the head of the church and head of the state.
Yeah, and so, for example, we have the King Charles as the monarch of England. He's the head of the Church of England. However, he doesn't fit the rest of the description. Like, yeah, he's Western Europe-ish, but has he plugged up these three entities? And when you do this whole study, which for those who are interested, we have a video, we'll put a link in the description that fleshes all of this out very in depth. There's so many, there's 10 points that you can, where you can pinpoint this power, right? All 10 have to fit.
Yeah.
King Charles doesn't fit all 10 by any means.
Yeah, for sure. We go to Daniel 7:21 and we get another clue. It says that this power makes war against the saints. Now, who are the saints?
It's God's people.
God's people. The Bible it uses that term many times to refer to God's people. It calls them the saints. And this power makes war against them. It says even that it prevails against them. So, in other words, there are times where the saints they're being overcome by this power. Is there a power, or does Rome, or the Vatican, I should say, fit the description of a power that persecuted the saints?
Yes. I mean, the estimates is like 50 million, but that's moderate. That's being shy about it. It's probably a lot more.
Yeah.
Of Protestants that were killed during the time of the Reformation. Again, people who opposed the system.
And I think what's interesting, what I should say about this, I appreciated a way that I heard a pastor say this once, so I'm going to say it. This is not about condemning Catholics.
No.
Really, if we were to put things into perspective, this is our history collectively in Christianity. Because Protestantism found, it came out of Catholicism. It was part of a church. It was the only church that really, you could say, kind of existed, at least in some big official capacity. There might have been God's people scattered here and there that you could classify as the church as well. But Protestants largely came out of this. And so we can look back and say, this is part of our history. It's not pretty. There were things that were done that we can look back and say, yeah, we could have done a better job as far as Christianity collectively in times past. There were some things that were done that were not good. But leading the way was that church-state power to persecute the saints. And that's why we are so thankful and adamant about freedom of conscience and freedom of religion, to be able to worship the way you want and not have somebody persecuting you because you think or believe differently or want to carry out actions that are different in the way that you worship. So if we go back to Daniel 7:25, we see this reinforced. Shall persecute the saints of the Most High. So it's not just saying it once, it's saying it multiple times. This is a description of that power. And we know many people lost their lives during times like the Inquisition and Crusades and all kinds of stuff. When we go back to Daniel 7:8, there's another clue, and it says it comes up among them. This kingdom comes to power by emerging from pagan Rome. It didn't just come out of nowhere. It's pagan Rome is where it comes from. That's the fourth kingdom that's mentioned in Daniel 7 is really what it's talking about.
Yeah.
And fascinating, if you look at the statue in Daniel chapter 2, when it gets to the part of Rome, which is the iron, it's what? What anatomical feature? It's
the legs.
Legs. How many legs are there? Two. And so we see with Rome, there are two branches. There is the pagan faith, which was, the ruling power during the time of Jesus that persecuted, Christians and even, and then we have the papal phase, which continued on essentially right after. It was, I wouldn't say it was a smooth transition, but it was a transition from one phase to another phase.
Right.
It just kind of changed form, more or less.
That's interesting. I've never thought about that before, but it's true. Yeah.
We go back to Daniel 7:25. There's another clue. It says, the saints shall be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. Okay. So what does all that mean? It means God's people would be handed over or put under the control of or be dominated by this power for this cryptic time frame that's listed in the Bible. And that time is time, times, and half a time. So when you look at this is how it's calculated. Time is equal to a year, times is equal to 2 years, and half a time is equal to half a year.
How do we know that?
How do we know that? We know that in part from other passages in the Bible. So, for example, if you look at the Nebuchadnezzar, okay, Nebuchadnezzar was essentially sentenced by God to act as a beast for 7 years. In the Bible, it says 7 times shall pass over you.
And that's 7 years.
And it was 7 years.
That makes sense.
So we're using that and other passages to determine this is what a time means. Okay,
Yes.
a time. So a time is a year times 2 years. This is plural, half a time, half a year. So we get to 3.5 years. Well, what does that really mean? Because we're talking about Bible prophecy. We're not just talking about any number of days or weeks or years or what have you. Well, in Bible prophecy, that 3.5 years is equivalent. It's equivalent to 1,260 days.
Yep.
It's equivalent to 42 months. They all add up to the same thing. And we're determining, this is based on a 360-day year. And it's calculated. It's like reverse engineering. So if you know 3.5 years is equivalent to 1,260 days, you divide the 1,260 days by the 3.5 to get the number of days in a year.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
And you can also fact check it with Revelation that speaks of the same event where you also get to 1,260 days or years. So Revelation and Daniel go hand in hand.
Yes. So it's a back calculation to arrive at the 360, and that's how we know that it is. So that time frame is prophetic years, because we are not talking about a literal 3.5 years. We're talking about a prophetic 3.5 years. And there are passages in the Bible that help us determine when there are prophetic years and when there are, literal years. And so this power, it says the saints are given over for 1,260 years. And we have clues in the Bible and other, this is in other videos and stuff that we make, but essentially that time frame goes from 538 to 1798. And if we look back in history, we can say, yes, this is a good fit for that church state power, that Vatican papal power, because this is the period of the Dark Ages. It reigned from 538 to 1798 until it received
a deadly wound.
Okay. So this is a clue to tell us about, the last pope or the last power. We go back to Daniel 7:25. We find another clue. He shall speak pompous words against the Most High. Who is the Most High?
It's Jesus. It's God.
Yeah. So this power is speaking pompous, or some translations say blasphemous words against the Most High. In Revelation 13:5, the Bible says that same power speaks great things and blasphemies. Okay, so the Daniel 13 has some parallel passages to Daniel chapter 7.
So also what you're saying, so shall speak pompous words or blasphemies. According to the Bible, blasphemy is saying that you are God and saying you can forgive sins, which is two different aspects of the papacy, right? They have priests where you have to confess your sins to a man, which the Bible says there's only one mediator between God and man, which is Jesus Christ, and only Jesus can forgive sins. And I was reading the news today, and even secular news media are saying, yeah, the Pope was considered the substitute for Christ on earth, that he was God. And they have their own statements. The Catholic Church has its own statements saying the Pope is God on earth. And so that applies to this as well.
Yeah. And you can look at articles or documents like Vatican II that confirm all of this kind of stuff. And I understand that there's a lot of controversy on how some of those things can be interpreted. I've looked at them, I've read them, when it seems like at the end of the day, it's not saying anything any different than it has in the past.
Right.
It may just be rewording it, retooling it, reframing it. But at the end of the day, they're claiming to be the power. And they are expecting that everybody should return back to them.
The Mother Church.
The Mother Church, yeah. I just saw a news clip the other day of someone who is suggesting that you need to unite and go back to the Catholic Church. So this is the prevailing sentiment. We also learn in Daniel 7:25, another clue is that he shall intend to change times and law. This passage, this whole section that Daniel's dealing with, when he's talking about this power and it persecutes just saints and it's speaking blasphemous or pompous words, this is written in a religious power context. And so the laws that it intends to change, if it's a blaspheming power, are laws that have to do with God's laws and times that God has set in order. And that is what it's referring to. It's not just any law, any time.
Right.
It's specifically religious times and religious laws. And if you were to look at the Bible and say, well, what are God's laws? Like what religious laws would still be applicable today? One example would be the 10 Commandments. Right?
And the fourth commandment is the commandment that has to do with time.
It is. It's a commandment that has to do with time and our relationship with God. So this power has stated, we can provide links to other videos about this, but it is stated that it has the power to change God's law and God's times.
I mean, in the video I referenced earlier about how that the papacy is the power of virtue in these verses, I showed a bunch of quotes, maybe like 10, 15 quotes that just all speak of the papacy saying, yeah, we changed Sunday to Sabbath.
Yes.
And in fact, if you are a Protestant keeping Sunday, you are acknowledging the papacy as your supreme ruler.
They're saying if you're going to make the Bible your rule of faith, if you're going to be intellectually honest, you would be worshiping on the Sabbath because we're the ones claiming authority to change the day of worship.
Yeah. They admitted themselves, we have changed it.
So that's very fascinating. So again, Rome, the papacy, this last power is the one saying, yeah, we have authority to do that. And it's an identifying mark of who it is. If we go to Revelation chapter 13, we see some other information that we can couple with this. This one, would you read this first, Denise?
Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb and spoke like a dragon. And he exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence and causes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed.
So when we're talking about this power being a power that wants to change time and law, and you couple that with what it says in Revelation 13, that there is coming an enforcement of worship. It's not a far stretch to say, well, how do people worship? Well, in a Christian context, people worship by joining together on a particular day out of the week and using that day in dedication to God through prayer, Bible study, the preaching of the word, doing activities that would help promote goodwill, to humanity, relieve suffering, things like that. If we're causing people to worship, this is forced. So it's saying this power will get to the point where it will not tolerate you doing anything differently than what they're doing. That's not religious freedom. That's going back to, the way it was before, where people are persecuted. They will be persecuted again.
Yep.
According to this passage.
That's right.
And then we see how it takes it a step to another step in Revelation 13, 16, and 17. Do you mind reading this?
He causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads, and that no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name.
All right. So it's a persecuting power. It's a power that is going to enforce worship or force worship in a way that is different than you may be used to, may desire to do, than your conscience may lead you to do. And it's going to enact penalties if you don't toe the line. When you look at history is a great tool to look forward. When you look at history, you can say, not only does this power have all these marks of identification, that it fits the Vatican, that it fits the papacy. When you look forward in Revelation to see what is going to happen in the end, all those things come back. So while it may have a deadly wound now, that deadly wound is healing. And power is laying dormant, so to speak, gaining power, gaining strength to come back to full strength so that it can reign and have sway in a way that it used to.
That's right.
It may look a little different, and there are going to be other entities involved. And of course, we have other videos about that. But to go back to our original premise, what does the last pope look like? What is the last pope? Who is the last pope? The Bible doesn't tell us the name of the individual. The Bible gives us some clues. It talks about the number of his name. And the Bible gives us many descriptions of what this power will be like and where it's from and how it operates and all of that.
Yep.
And so who is the last pope? Essentially, the last pope is whoever's sitting in the throne of the papacy at the end of time, carrying out all of this to persecute God's people.
Including the mark of the beast.
Yeah. So that's the last pope. And the Bible tells us everything that we need to know. So we don't have to go to Nostradamus. We don't have to go to the prophecies of St. Malachy. And what I like about the Bible is these are written in a way that they're timeless. It's not trying to set people up for some specific date, because God knows how humanity is. He knows if there's some specific date, we're procrastinators. We'll put off our salvation.
Yep.
We'll put off getting ready until, 6 months before, the year before, 3 months before. Instead of being ready now. And that's what God wants for us. He wants us to be ready now. We should be ready to face whatever will come. And God will give us the strength to do that, just like he did the people that came before us.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't matter what year. Look for the signs that the Bible has determined. Look for the clues that the Bible has determined in this video and other videos to see who is the last pope. I believe we're close.
I believe
we're on the horizon.
Oh, yeah.
And I believe it wasn't Francis because he's dead. And a new one is on the way. But it doesn't matter if it's that one or another one to come behind him. It's whoever executes this end time scenario. That is the last pope.
And I think the essence of all of this is not to be afraid.
Yeah.
Not to worry like, oh, wow, I've studied this, I understand this, and I understand that we're really close. The essence is Jesus.
Absolutely.
So studying the prophecies should point us back to Jesus. The Revelation 1 verse 1 says
revelation of Jesus Christ.
Of Jesus Christ is a revealing and opening up of information about Jesus Christ. And so this should cause us to want to come to Jesus and have a closer relationship with him and say, Lord, I see I've been living my life in a way that doesn't line up with your will as described in the Bible, and help me to overcome my sins to be fully surrendered to you, though the heavens may fall.
And in Revelation, we're seeing a stark contrast between who Jesus is and what he's like, and that power that imitates him or masquerades and has many of the same qualities. It's very fascinating when you look at the Bible, how closely Satan will take an end time power and have some of the same aspects that look like Christ, but it doesn't act like Christ. And that's where the proof is in the pudding. It has to act like Christ. We need to act like Christ in these last days. So, yeah, that's the answer. It may not be the answer people were looking for. They probably wanted to know a name or a date, but the Bible doesn't give us that.
I think there's more value in what you have shared than just us dropping a name and saying that one.
We've been given all the clues, and we know when the time will come. And that's all we need.
And again, we've got more videos on this. We've got a video on who one of these beast powers is and how the United States is actually involved in end time prophecy. We got a video on who the Antichrist is, and again, how the papacy fulfills this kind of power that you just described, like in depth. You can just go through these verses that Keith just shared. Definitely just study for yourself. And we've got a video on what the mark of the beast is, which is going to be enforced by the Antichrist power. So worth checking out and study your own Bible.
Amen. If you like this video, like,
subscribe,
and hit the notification bell so you know when we launch new videos.
And drop a comment below, and we'll try to get back to you if we can. What?
Say that again.
No, I don't know what to say.